Hello everyone, and welcome to Game 6 of the FIDE World Championship with Ding Liren against Ian Nepomniatchi. Ding had the white pieces today, and Ian was defending, and the game started off with a London, unfortunately. We don't see the exchange right here, instead the knight comes over to c6, knight d2. Then we see the capture with the pawn taking instead of the knight. Bishop comes over to f5, we see c3, then e6, bishop b5, bishop to d6, we see the exchange of the dark square bishops, then a castle from white, castle from black, rook coming to e1, so everything is still normal thus far. H6, and this move does seem a little bit weird, just because I feel like Nepo could have put one of his rooks in the center instead. I don't see this, stopping anything really, because knight g5 isn't really a plan that was to be happening in the future. I mean, maybe, with the idea of pushing f4, but it doesn't have a pawn to help support it on e3, and the rook is already off the f file. So I'm not really sure what the idea was behind h6. Maybe it was just to, change up the theory and go, slightly out of order, because maybe this happens later on in the lines in the London. But here we didn't have anything. Knight takes the center with knight to e5. Nepo goes back. He does not yet wish to trade and get this kind of pawn structure, because I think that his pawn on c6 would be rather bad. We see a4 from Ding. a6 from Nepo, and I was watching this part live, and the commentators, Anish Giri and David Howell, I think it is, I'm not too sure as to what his name is, but they did not really like the move a6, because it kind of creates this backwards pawn here on b7, and the way that you kind of save backwards pawns is you push them and then trade them off. However, right here, that's not going to be a very good trade for you. Because he has protection over the square after he goes back wherever the bishop chooses to go. Whether it be f1, e2, wherever he wants to go. He chooses to go to f1, which is pretty common. A lot of people took away their bishops here on the, f1, c1, f8, c8 squares. And that kind of indicates that you're looking towards a late game and that you're trying to preserve your piece. So you just have to make sure you move your rook out of the way first to do so. We see the knight come here to d7, and the idea is to try to get rid of this knight, I imagine, just because it is super strong, protecting a lot of the field. I have hiccups, so I apologize. But yeah, he probably wants to trade this knight off. So we see the trade. And then we see a5, and this is an example of one pawn defending two. So even though this side of the board right here, if you don't count this b2 pawn for a moment, even though there's two different pawns right here, that one pawn is successfully stopping both of them. So now you could use these pawns to create an attack and see if you could get a pass pawn with them. This pawn will also be pretty much a target for the remainder of the game, unless Nepo is able to do something about it. So we see queen come over to c7, and the idea here is that there is an outpost that was created for the knight on c5, and black would very much not like white to have that outpost. So the idea with the queen moving to c7 is that if you play like b4, for example, to further support that knight movement, this pawn will just get taken. Which is why white, Ding, plays queen to f3. He also wants to stop this support from coming through for the e5 push, because this is kind of how you get out of this bad position. You kind of get rid of the, the outpost that white could have for its knight. Now we see queen to not queen, that was a rook. Rook fc8. And again, we're just kind of fighting over this area right here. And now, you still can't do the move b4, because now, even though the queen defends it, the rook is there at the end to pick it up. So he defends with rook a3. We see the bishop drop back to f6, and I'm not sure if he's looking for like a f6 e5 push. This move I didn't completely understand. Maybe he's trying to find a home for his knight. I'm not sure. Knight comes over to b3, trying to make its way over to c5. We get the knight coming here to c6. Ding tries to exchange the queens, and by exchanging queens here, you get to I would consider it a more favorable endgame for white if this trade were to occur. And the main reason for that would be that this outpost exists, and that knight is going to be constantly threatening this b7 pawn, which cannot move forward. You're also going to be targeting this pawn, so this pawn can't move forward, and then you're going to have all sorts of back rank trouble with that knight. And obviously Nepo does not want to reach that endgame because that's a lot better for white, so he tries keeping the pieces on the board a little longer. So queen e7, and we see h4 from Ding. And again, I'm not too certain as to what the idea is. Maybe he's still trying to just get a better endgame position for himself. Maybe he's going to try bringing his queen to like e3, for example, and then getting the pawn on g3, and then all of his pawns will be on dark squares, and he'll be particularly happy in that endgame. Whereas if you look at Nepo, all of his pawns are on white squares, which is not good if you have a white bishop. We see the rook come over to e8, so he's still trying to somehow make this break work, because that break will open up the position again, and then this c5 outpost won't exist for the strong endgame. But as of now, it does exist, so Ding takes the square for his knight, and we see the push. And there's no reason to capture, because like I said, you just lose the knight, obviously. And even if there wasn't a queen there, let's say the queen is on d8 or something at this moment, I mean, there's no reason to get rid of your outpost, have him trade for it, pretty much. But there's also threat levels here too, right? Because if he takes, then you have a very nice pawn right here that you'll be taking. Perhaps not in this instant, just because that would actually get your pieces stuck. Also, that move wouldn't occur because the queen is pinned. But we see the knight take on a5, and that is a temporary pawn up that, Ian will take, but it'll be short-lived because this pawn will be taken. And this pawn was much better than the side a5 pawn. Even though that pawn, I mentioned how strong it is, holding two. Middle pawns, central pawns, sorry, not middle pawns. Central pawns are in general, both early and mid-game, much stronger than side pawns. And if you remember, I said don't worry about that b2 pawn for now. Well, now you could kind of consider it. These pawns are never going to be, passers easily. More work still has to be done for those to be, pass pawns. So we are going to see this pawn being actually more of a nuisance than, that a5 pawn. Queen comes over to f6, and now you have to move the rook out of the way because you obviously don't want to lose that. Knight comes over, forking the two rooks, forcing the exchange. And now you have kind of this awkward pawn on c4, and you might see a move like b5 to kind of come and attempt to defend it. We'll see. No, we actually see h5 instead. So we're trying to get this bishop off, get some threats going. Bishop comes over to c2. Pawn is taken, and now Ding Liren is actually a pawn up. Queen comes over to b6, and that pawn advantage was short-lived, because now you have to return somewhere, and then this pawn can be taken. The reason why you can't take this is the queen. The rook is going to take on e8 with check, and then you'll just drop the queen, so that is not a free knight. So we see the exchange, and then the other pawn is picked back up. However, if you look at the position that both players have, Nepo has these two isolated pawns, and isolated pawns, as everyone knows, are weaknesses, not strengths. They can be strengths, in the middle game when they have a lot of protection behind them and you have a siege that you're starting with it, if you're the one on offense. But Nepo has been on the back foot all game, so these are not strong individual pawns, and they're also, blocked off. So they have no way of, getting anywhere, really. So we see rook to a5, and there is another pawn that could be picked up right here. But we're starting to see, some threats, right? We have a lot of strong pieces that are coming towards the king that you can't ignore. So the king comes over to h7, just a safer square, somewhere where it's in tune with the bishop. We see rook coming over to c5, just looking to put further pressure on this c4 pawn. We see a check. King has to move to h2. And the reason we see that check is because Nepo realized that he's not getting the best winning chances anymore, so he should probably start looking for like a draw instead if he can. So if you could somehow get your queen to d1, pretend these two don't exist for a moment, then this here would become a repetition. And even though obviously right now these two exist, at the moment, there could be scenarios where they kind of move off to either defend this pawn, which is now a pass pawn, or, an attack on the king. We see f6, queen comes over to g3. We see a5, another choice is g5 to try to trade off the queens, but I don't think that would work too well right now. So instead we're going to get a pass pawn, and we have to see if Ding wants to deal with that or not, or if he thinks that his attack will be faster. So first he does the move that does two things, right? Picks up a free pawn, and it targets a second pawn, so it kind of makes your opponent's next move a4. And then what he does is he blocks off the queen's access to the g5 square. Because remember how I said that this rook is kind of keeping the queen from going here right now and trying to exchange the queens? Well, that rook would be happier on something like c7, pressuring the king right here and trying to force a mate, where this rook now has to defend, and all of a sudden that a pawn is not so easily defended. It's just getting protected by the bishop for the time being. Bishop drops back to b1. Doesn't want to get exchanged right now either. It's something else that I do not think that Black would enjoy. Rook comes to c7. Like I said, it's a happy square for it. This rook now has to defend. Knight is looking to take f6 with check and pinning the rook and the king. Cannot recapture because of this check. So the king moves out of the way. Oops. Go back a bit. Skip some moves. Rook comes over to a7. Like I said, you want to be on the 7th rank. However, the fact that you're covering this a pawn from queening is also important. You can still push it 2 more times just because it's protected on those squares, but the queen is going to have to come to like b2, for example, to get that final push in, and there's still, a couple of moves for that to occur. The knight comes over to e7, and now you're looking at another check that could occur. You're also currently threatening the rook. Rook has to come over to f8, and now you also have this check if you wanted to make this exchange happen. But instead, Ding pushes d5, and I saw this one live as well, and yeah, that's why it took the computer a second to figure out that that was a good move. At first it thought that it was kind of dumb, and then it looked at it and they were like, oh, okay, that's actually a really good move. The reason for that is that there's a mating pattern. So essentially what the pattern would be is, let's just say he pushes a2, for example. I believe it would be, well, actually, this just mate in 1. Well, no, not yet. What was the mating knight again? c7? Yeah, and you're trying to create a battery. So if this turns into a queen, you have g6 check. Bishop would have to take. Then you have this. And then there's another mating threat, which I'll show you in a moment, that involves that pawn being there. And that involves the queen coming over to f7, and then if you get a queen, no, sorry, that's wrong. If you take right here, then you take with the queen, is that right? No. It's a hard mating pattern, even I'm having trouble, and I saw this happen live. Queen comes over to f7. Yeah, the computer is recommending f4 is the best move, just because it's lost. But in the game, I believe that Nepo just resigned. Let's just look at the sack in question, though. You get this. Rook goes to a8 with check. Has to go to f7. There we go. Then the rook comes over to f8, and all of a sudden, those squares are cut off, with that pawn on d5 being the main cutoff square that the computer didn't understand at first. Sorry that took me so long to figure out. I even saw it live. I should have been faster. But the checkmate didn't actually happen on the board. Nepo ended up resigning after, I can't remember if it was this d5 move, or which move exactly he resigned after, but he didn't let the checkmate play out on the board. Some people would rather give Liren the chance to make the beautiful checkmate appear, where you sacrifice the queen for the mate, where the pawn cuts off the escape square. But Nepo wasn't having it and just resigned. But the score is now 3-3. We're going to have a day off tomorrow, and then there's going to be another 2 games in a row. Next time these guys play, Nepo will have the white pieces. It seems like whenever one side has white, they tend to do a little bit better. I know that Nepo did take 1 win when he was on the black pieces, but I don't think that Liren was playing with necessarily his favorite opening at that point, or his strongest opening, I should say. He looked very good in this London right here, which the commentators were saying was the first ever London to be played on the World Championship stage. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you for the next video.